everyone to Galerie Myrtis. I have to say, from my own perspective, this is my favorite gallery in Baltimore, and certainly that's an unbiased opinion of the place. But I'm happy to welcome you here, and also happy to introduce our esteemed artist, Elsa Gebreyesus. Was born in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia in 1969. She lived in Ethiopia, Kenya, and the United States before going to retrieve her BA from Brock University in Ontario, Canada. And after Eritrea won its independence from Ethiopia, she lived there for 5 years, working as a project officer with an indigenous women's organization. After leaving Eritrea, she came to the United States, where she's been pursuing her lifelong passion for art. And in addition to her passion for art, she also volunteers and works with organizations involved with human rights issues, especially in Africa. And she continues to learn from artists she admires and has been greatly influenced by modern painters from both Africa and the West. And among the notable collectors of her art are Ms. Susan Rice, current U.S. States Ambassador to the United Nations, Ms. Gail Smith, Special Assistant to the President and Senior Director of the National Security Council in the current Obama administration, and Mr. Anthony Lake, Executive Director of UNICEF, and David Lane, Executive Director and CEO of the One Campaign. Additionally, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation in DC and are the corporate collectors. So also welcome to Galerie Myrtis. Thank you so much.
I'm Alex, and we're so happy to have Elsa here at Galerie Myrtis in Baltimore. We think that we have a gallery here that where we really want to explore and give artists the opportunity to express themselves. And as you see, there's a piece behind me, and this piece behind me is titled Mystic Journey. And I think it's such a great segue for a person like Elsa, whose activism, patriotism, self-discovery, all these things come together and meet and produce all of this wonderful art. So Elsa, we want to welcome you to Galerie Myrtis. And I think it'd be so great to have some framework around the art that we see here today, and that framework is part of your journey as to how we ended up here today. So if you could, more than happy for you to get into that a little bit today.
First of all, thank you everyone for coming today. I really appreciate that you guys are here for the talk. Thank you, Alex and Myrtis, Tanya, and for everyone coming to the show. When I was first thinking about doing this show at Galerie Myrtis, I really wanted to do something very personal to me, and something that really expresses, like you said, my journey as a woman, as an artist, as a person from Africa, in particular from Eritrea. Like they mentioned earlier, I had gone back and lived in Eritrea for 5 years after living here in the West. And it's been some time since I had gone back to Africa, and I went back last summer. And just the sounds and the smells, just the visual stimulation from being there really inspired me for this show. And there is so much beauty, and Africa is a huge continent full of just promise, and it's so rich in culture and very diverse. And I really wanted to celebrate that aspect of Africa in this show. At the same time, being from Eritrea and also having, experiences in other African countries, Africa is also a continent that is just constantly in flux, that is constantly growing in leaps and bounds. Countries are developing in leaps and bounds. At the same time, they're struggling with a lot of poverty, with a lot of human rights issues, with war, genocide, a lot of devastation. So alongside that beauty, there is all this pain and difficulty in that continent. And I didn't think that a show just celebrating the beauty of Africa was enough, was true to me. I really wanted to have another aspect of it and use it as a platform to educate and sort of raise awareness about some of the issues, and in particular the issue in Eritrea. I'm not sure how familiar all of you are about Eritrea. It's a newly independent country. It's young as far as nationhood is concerned. It was newly independent in 1993 from Ethiopia. So at that time, there was a lot of promise to be, to build this nation from scratch. And in the first few years, there was not, the direction of the country was not really known. And now, several years later, it has become one of the most repressive governments. It's, there are positive aspects as well, but a lot of it is, there are a lot of human rights issues that go on in the country.
And you spent 5 years there in your travel back, right? I mean, because you were born in Ethiopia, right? And your parents are from...
Yeah, they're Eritrean. A lot of Eritreans lived in Ethiopia. It was all one country at the time,
right.
So there was very little distinction between the two, except there was a little bit of, as far as the political distinction. Culturally, there's a little bit, there is a different language, and Eritrea is much smaller. The capital city, Asmara, is a very small city. It has, and the history behind the independence of the country was that during the colonial times, all African countries, after the colonial powers left, were granted independence. They got independence. The British were in Kenya, but after they left, it became Kenya. The French were in Rwanda. All those different colonial powers, once they left, their colonized territories became, they became independent countries. The only country that was never colonized is Ethiopia. Eritrea was colonized by the Italians. And so most Eritreans assumed that after the Italians left, that it would be an independent nation. But that never happened because Ethiopia did not want to be blocked off from the sea. And at that time, it was one of the more powerful nations in Africa, and they demanded that they annex Eritrea. And that was what actually sparked the struggle for independence for the country. And it took 30 years of a war to get Eritrea independence. And that created a real strong national sentiment. And so I had never actually been to Eritrea because from the time I was born, the war was going on. And I went back after independence.
So what year did you go back? What year was this?
I went back in 92.
In 92.
Right? They had the war had been over, but they hadn't done the official vote to become an independent country.
So from 92.
I was there when they...
So you were there for 5 years.
From 92 to
97. Okay, and so we're talking, what, 17 years ago now? I went back to work with a women's organization. I went back to work as a project officer. It was, a country devastated by war. I figured, they needed some assistance. I was out of university, and I wanted to go back and visit the village of my mother, my grandparents, and visit relatives that I had never met, speak the language better, and I went back and it's a very patriarchal culture, and I grew up, of course, with the influence of the West and strong women's, movements and awareness of that, and I kind of wanted to go back and help with the women's particular, women's issues back then. So when did you start? Were you already an artist when you
went back there? I've always been a lover of art, but no, I was not painting at that time.
You weren't painting at that time. So what made you start painting? Because now you're an artist, we have all this wonderful art. What sparked that?
I think I've always had a very creative side to me. Even if I was not painting, I was visiting galleries, I was going to museums ever since I was very young. And in particular, I have always been drawn to abstract paintings. I think because it really speaks to parts of our psyche that is less tangible, not visible, but our emotions are like that. There's so much of our lives that are not that you cannot touch or hold in your hand. It's emotion and sentiment and feelings and thoughts. The idea of a thought, you can't hold it in your hand, but you think it, right? So whenever I saw some abstract pieces, it would hit me. I would connect on a different level, and I really loved that. And as I grew older, I always felt in our culture too, it's never really encouraged. That's not something that you do, And so I had to overcome some of those cultural barriers myself. And but it brought me a lot of joy just to be even around art. And I slowly came to the realization that the art that I can create it for myself. Initially, I never thought I would be exhibiting at a gallery or at that level. I was really starting to paint for myself, for bringing joy to me, and painting the kind of paintings that I can connect to. And over time, it grew. I've taken classes and getting better and better at the craft as well, to kind of create to connect to the feeling that I have when I see the kind of work that I like. And it's been a matter of trying to catch up what my skills are to what I feel.
Skills and feelings.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's very much for me the language of how I feel. It's, I think, for me much more. It's something that I can connect with, and it's personally feel that I can express it. But how to express it visually, how to express it in a way that is tangible.
Well, the show that you're exhibiting, the show that you have up, does that very well. And of course, this show is titled Afruika, the Primal Source, and there are at least I think there's like 25 pieces in the show, and we have some of the pieces that we would love for you to talk about and share with people exactly what you were feeling when you created the show. But first, the show is called Afruika, the Primal Source. What was the feeling behind the title of the show for that, and why? How did you come up with that?
It is. Africa is the birthplace of life, right? It's the beginning. It's where the earliest human remains have been found. It's in essence, we are all African, wherever we're from, whatever color we are, whatever we are, wherever we're from, we're all connected. And we come from that place, we come from that continent. Our origins are there. And that's behind what the subtitle, the Primal Source. That is the source of so many things. Of course, it's more, some of the pieces are very Eritrea or Ethiopia specific, because that is where I'm from. But I did want to focus on there. I mean, it has such a rich history, and there is not enough information about that here in the West. Eritrea and Ethiopia are just, the language itself is, to me, because I came to it much older and also from an outside view, although I am from there. The language is like the symbols, the letters, the alphabet itself. It has like Latin origin, and then there are two languages that are derived from there. The way the language is structured, it's a celebration of the cultural richness of Africa. And it's just small. There is so much more in that continent. But it is, some of the pieces that I started with, that they talk about having beginnings and then the primal source of things, and going into part of Egypt, the source of language, of communication, of so much, of astronomy, of there's so much in that continent, and so the symbols in the language as well, for me, I thought are just beautiful to look at, let alone what the actual meaning
we
is.
put a piece up, and this piece is called "In the Beginning," which we just mentioned, and it's a very beautiful piece. It's rich in color, and if you could just see the piece, live, it's a whole different feeling. So why don't you talk about that a little bit and tell us?
A lot of the shapes and symbols that I use, the triangles, these are shapes that are repeated often in almost all cloth in Africa, in patterns of the doors, in the carvings. There is a lot of celebration of the language in here again. The symbols as a celebration, they don't have any particular meaning, but the shapes and the colors that language originated. The colors are just sort of something like something gesticulating, something beginning, something growing. And out of, there's so much beauty. There's some Egyptian symbols in there. And I did throw in some vuvuzelas because it was so funny during the World Cup to hear this, background noise of these instruments that are used in very traditional ceremonies and celebrations and weddings in Africa. And, it's just turning everybody's head, because it's partly noisy and people are not understanding what that is about, but I thought it was beautiful. And I really wanted to throw it in there, that there are, in our musical instruments are different. And not enough people know about them, so I wanted to.
It's a wonderful piece. Let's go to the next. And Desert Dreams. We had a really, really good response from this piece. Of course, this was a piece that we used to promote Africa, the Primal Source. And the moment that we put this on the internet and we sent the announcement out, this piece sold immediately. Tell us a little bit about this.
Again, this one was really inspired by the colors. Eritrea is also by the ocean. We have a real affinity to the ocean, to the water, the desert, the heat. This piece really speaks to how I feel sometimes there. When you're there, it's very hot, it's dry, it's deserty, but it's vibrant because of that as well. And the beads are in there because we use a lot of beadwork as well, and the patterns of the circles it represents so many different things. The skin on cheetahs and leopards, and especially cheetahs, I would say, and circles are also a really prominent part of our pattern in our traditional clothing, in jewelry, anything like that.
It's wonderful. And of course, this is Mystic Journey, and that's the piece that we used to introduce you. Tell us a little bit about this.
And it's the same thing. It's similar. I really wanted these pieces also to have a theme, the unifying visual sort of theme. The pattern is, on the bottom of the canvases, and in our traditional clothing, all the pattern work is on the bottom. So I wanted that to also reflect in the pieces, in the paintings. The colors, again, these are very much the colors of the land, of the soil. There is that reddish soil in Africa, in Kenya. When I was growing up, the sun, the heat, the colors in our food, the spices. These are colors that are just very much ingrained in our lives. So, and again, I really wanted to celebrate the shapes. There's Egyptian shapes in there, the language, the patterns, and I just want to celebrate it, all that.
Now, how big is the Eritrean community? We're in the Washington, Baltimore area. How big is the community of
The Washington, D.C., Virginia, that area, it probably has the highest number of Eritreans outside of Eritrea. I would say between 30 to 50,000 people.
Wow, so there's a strong sense of community still that you have, even not being in the country itself. There's
Oh yeah,
quite a few people.
absolutely, absolutely. The Ethiopian community is much larger, but Ethiopia again is a much larger country. It's estimated now about in Eritrea maybe 3.5 to 4 million worldwide. It's a small population. The Ethiopian population, I mean, is considered at least 80 million people, and I would say at least 150,000 here in the DC, Maryland, Virginia area.
Wow.
They have their own villages.
So
And it's thick.
you're not lonely.
No, so the
DC.
food, you can get the food. And of course, people gravitate together because they want to create that sense of community. And they need that connection. It is very much a connected community especially in the food that we eat, the music that we hear, everything, churches, you name it. In the Eritrean community, the Ethiopian community is much larger, so it's much more diverse. The Eritrean community is much more divided, and the politics plays a very, very big part.
I was going to ask you about that because the way the country, and then of course you talked about the 30-year civil war, is there any sort of residue between Ethiopians and Eritreans who are here in the area? Is that just something that doesn't even exist?
It's mixed. I would say it's a mixed situation. On a personal level, I don't think it's that strong. It's people avoid politics most of the time. It's the political state that it's in, but people in general are not that way. Most people are, because we are all mixed. I grew up in Myrtis, people are married to Eritreans, people are married to Ethiopians, you name it. So it's mixed. It's not really that divisive amongst the people.
So you get a good reaction from your work with the community of Eritreans and Ethiopians.
Yeah, I exhibit most of the time actually. The Ethiopian art community is also much more developed than the Eritrean art community. So I exhibit with Ethiopian all the time. There's really no issue. I feel personally at least. Within the Eritrean community is much more. It's a smaller community, so of course things are much more under a magnifying glass, right? My art first of all, abstract art in both places is not that well understood. And some of my pieces, of course, speak to human rights issues in Eritrea, so, a lot of Eritreans steer very clear away from that.
Oh, okay. Well, we have some pieces that we're going to show.
Yeah, they want to travel, they want to go, they want to be part of the community, and right now you really can't be vocal and discuss those issues without somehow putting or feeling like you may put someone or part of your family or yourself in jeopardy.
Well, we're going to get into, so we have another segment, but we still have another piece here that deals with it's called Celebration, and of course all the pieces that we're showing in the beginning here are all the pieces that celebrate the things that you talk about. This is another extraordinary piece, and I believe is there two other pieces that go with this?
Yes, I'm so drawn to the color of Mystic Journey. So I always push myself to, when I paint, to expand in my use of different colors. And one of the ways of expanding and pushing yourself is also using colors that you're not, sometimes not so comfortable using or not used to using. And I really wanted to use black and white. And sometimes when I'm painting, one of the ways to really push your creativity is also to restrict yourself with certain colors. Using no more than 2 colors. Using no more than 3 colors. And finding and creating colors and shades within that to give the painting depth and to give the work, to challenge yourself in a way. So this really only has 3 colors. And everything is created from that, is either making a lighter version of it or a wash or opaque using that. So again, partly inspired from my trip last year. I went on safari and I fell in love with zebras. And they were just gorgeous animals. And so I really wanted a piece that kind of reminded me of the black and white, using some of that pattern. It really, and wanting it to be a beautiful piece, and really using the idea of celebration, and really trying to connect to that feeling of being in that open savannah, and just seeing all these animals in their natural habitat, just coexisting. It's beautiful. And so again, there's vuvuzelas, all the other symbols of play and push and pull of the colors, but that is part of the inspiration behind that piece.
Wonderful. So now we're going to talk a little bit about, as part of the show here in Africa, Primal Source, you have pieces from another show or another series of works that you created called Silenced. And this deals with some of the issues in Eritrea that we are going to talk about now, which let's put some framework around that. We talked about how wonderful things are, and in the pieces and the instruments and things of that nature, but there's some business still left to do. Now, when's the last time you've been back? Have you been back to Eritrea since you left in 97?
No.
You haven't been back. Okay, so, and there's reasons why for all of that. And you have work that sort of is an expression of that disconnect in that way. So, and the piece is here called Silence. And the first piece that we're putting up here is called September 18th. And let's talk a little bit, that's a special day. And we talked about this earlier, and I was very surprised when you explained to me the significance of all of that.
So I left, like I said, in Eritrea in 97. Soon in 98, a year later, another war broke out between Ethiopia and Eritrea. And it was a border war. And they had some, disagreement about a particular border. And it just threw the country back into turmoil. This was in, just a few years after being independent. And so the time that I was there, it was sort of euphoric. Not many people thought that Eritrea would ever see independence. My parents never thought they would ever see Eritrea as an independent country. So initially, there was just a lot of euphoria. And when I went back, I wanted to go back right in that early period, because I thought this is the only time that is going to have this feeling. As the country changes and grows, it could go towards democracy and, nationhood, or it could take a different path. And of course, there was a lot of energy of people who had gone out, who grew up outside, who went back to help rebuild the country into a democratic country. But over time, unfortunately, as the case in many, many countries that are coming out of a revolutionary system, it's very hard to transition into a democratic government. And soon there was too much turmoil, and in 98 they were back at war. And at that time, everything was starting from scratch. The writing of the Constitution, we were there when I was there when the Constitution was being written, and actually one of my friends who's here from New York today was part of the referendum commission helping, work on the vote to get Eritrea to be independent. And so we were there when things were just beginning. And there was no newspapers, everything was starting from scratch. So everything was, they were making new laws about how to create new press laws, everything, organizations, nonprofit organizations, everything, Department of Education, everything was starting from scratch. And slowly, of course, everybody's creative juices was running, and there was several independent newspapers that were allowed to be open and operate. But as the political issues were coming to the forefront, people started writing articles and things like that, and the government was not very happy about that. So they didn't do anything right away. But in 2001, on September 18th, there was a big crackdown. This is a week after 9/11, when the world's attention is focused elsewhere. Nobody is paying attention to a small country in Africa. And September 18th, and all the people that were vocal in the newspapers, in the government, there was 15 members of parliament that were very vocal by giving interviews to the journalists. They went and rounded them up in the middle of the night, and they've been in jail ever since 2001. And nobody's heard from them, whether they're alive or dead. These were people there were ministers, there were heads of big, huge departments in the country. There were people who fought for the independence of the country, and they are now still in jail to this day.
This day, so it's 9/11, 2001?
2001.
Wow.
And so I knew some of these people personally, and it was just so disheartening and so disappointing that this happened in Eritrea. And it's such a small country, and they're so insignificant in the world, in the news of the world. And these are people who chose not to go the path of a barrel of a gun and go overthrow the leader of the country by assassination or a revolutionary army. They spoke out using words, using the most peaceful method of requesting reform in the country, for freedom of press, for reforming aspects of the government. And for that, the response was to be shut down and put in prison. And those newspapers were shut down, the editors were jailed, so some of the pieces, and so this is the significance of that date for me.
Wow. So to this day, what is the current status today? Because now we're talking, that was 13 years ago. So if we didn't hear about it, a week after 9/11 in the United States, because all the focus was there, it's been 13 years, and I don't, when I see the world news, I don't see Eritrea
It hasn't changed.
Okay, so
it hasn't changed. It's the same. They are still in jail. There have been no official charges except for that they threatened national security. No lawyers. No nothing. There is a constitution that does not allow that kind of imprisonment or detention, but it's just a piece of paper. It's not implemented.
Okay. Let's take a look at another piece here, and wow, so we see it's like some newspaper clippings that are incorporated into the canvas piece.
A lot of these pieces, the newspapers actually there were just a few of them when I left. These came out even after I left. Basically between 98 and 2001 is when these newspapers were in existence in Eritrea. This one is called Asmara Today. It's like, a little newspaper. And these are the actual, copies of them, but there were some journalists that managed to escape and are here now. And through their contacts, they brought me these copies of these newspapers. This was one of the newspapers that was shut down, and the editor of these newspapers are in jail. So some of these pieces, the text that you see, are the actual newspapers that were in existence at that time. They don't exist anymore at that time.
Wow.
And some of them, it has the same thing. This one is Wintana. The Wintana was the other newspaper. It means our wish, our hope. It has sections of it, like there's horoscope, there's classified. So it's just like a normal newspaper.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And these were young journalists, young editors,
Mm-hmm.
trying to start a career in the newspaper industry.
Mm-hmm.
And it had a great circulation. It had better circulation, of course, than the government paper, and that was a threat.
But with the current, because we have things like the internet and people can see things all over the world, I mean, can you get the internet in Eritrea right now? I mean, there's some
Yes.
places where they
And yes, you can. It's monitored. There are internet cafes, but there are, people are nervous. Whether it's true or not, the assumption is that there are government operatives in the cafes watching what you do and what sites you're visiting. So they're very, very careful about what you do. You can do, as long as you're not doing what they would consider subversive, communications.
So has your artwork found its way into, do you know, hearing back from people in
Oh,
Eritrea
yeah.
that they're seeing the artwork or they're seeing the newspaper clippings?
I don't know about it in Eritrea,
Yeah.
but yes, here, yes, it does. It has gone out, and there are, like I said, the community is very divided. There are some parts of the community that do not like discussing these issues about Eritrea. That you cannot afford to discuss anything negative about the country. That it has, yes, problems, but really it's on the right track, and for some reason, the fact that there are people who are imprisoned without rule of law is somehow just, put aside. It's not addressed. It's not, it's not personal for a lot of people, and it's happening to the other. There must have been something done, or maybe they did something wrong. And I think people forget that there are processes. And of course, if you do speak out, there are repercussions. Either you cannot go back, it's not safe for you to go back, you could potentially be put in jail. Paintings like this would be considered subversive. This is something that is, you're doing something against the government at this point.
So you couldn't go back with this work right now. No, you're here, this is it. Now you need to.
Yeah, absolutely. Until some change happens. I would not be comfortable going back.
Berlin Manifesto. Tell us about that.
The Berlin Manifesto was, this probably is one of the precursors, it's one of the things that got the ball rolling to the events of September 18. There was a group of professionals who lived abroad, in the diaspora. Doctors, lawyers, professors from Europe, from the US, that are Eritrean. A group of them, 13 of them, decided to meet in Berlin and write a private letter to the leader of Eritrea, Isaias Afwerki, president, and they wrote, it was a letter, basically, saying, "Dear Mr. President, we have concerns that the country is heading in the wrong direction, that we have a constitution that's not being implemented," and basic issues like that. And they put it in a letter, and they were sending it privately to the leader. It was a mix of people. Some of them had fought in the struggle for liberation. Some of them had supported the struggle from abroad. There were professors. These were prominent Eritrean leaders. And as it was being sent, a copy was leaked and went into the internet, found its way into the internet. And it caused a big brouhaha within the Eritrean community. And
How so? What's the brouhaha?
well, it was treasonous. How dare they would write this letter that is such an affront to the leader, to embarrass him this way. It was considered very, not so much. I mean, it was just shocking that that a group of people would write those kind of things and basically air the dirty laundry.
Okay.
And even they themselves were not expecting to make it public. They were writing it. They didn't expect to be put in the spotlight like that. They were sending it privately. Nobody knew that they were meeting. It was a very secret. I mean, they were just talked among themselves and decided to meet and send this letter off. They know him personally. They've worked with him. So they never expected it to have the kind of effect that it did. And once it got leaked onto the internet, of course, there were blogs and discussions and things within the community. But because that's the only free media that exists, is something that they cannot contain. That it found its way onto the internet. And so there was big discussions about it, and eventually got labeled, that letter was called the Berlin Manifesto. Mm-hmm. That's how the title came up. And so it happened in October 2000. This letter became public. And initially, he didn't do an immediate crackdown, because that was what the letter was talking about. And the letter also found its way, of course, since it was on the internet, found its way to Eritrea. The journalists started talking about it, asking the government ministers, what do you think about this letter? And this is how these government ministers and people in Eritrea started discussing it and having all sorts of long, articles, interviews. And the newspaper was it would be printed by 8 o'clock, it would be on the street, 9:30, every edition is sold out. And so it was being digested really well by the public. It was sensational, it was things that people want to hear about. And so this went on from October of 2000 until September. They were just waiting and biding their time until the crackdown, until it was a conducive environment for a crackdown.
So for you as an artist, I mean, going from that feeling to the canvas, I mean, tell us about that in between, that space that's in between. How did you get there? When you're creating the piece, is this soon after the Berlin Manifesto you created this piece?
No,
I probably reflection to you.
Yeah, every year when September rolls around, I really think about them, because when I went back to Eritrea, it was really a very euphoric time. It was a wonderful time to be there. And the people that I met, the people who fought for independence, they gave up their lives, their education, their family. These were our people who could have been doctors. They could have gone and done anything, and they chose to fight for an independent country. And the struggle was exactly, what everybody's talking about now. We're fighting for democracy. There's a fight for democracy in that country, and most people fought for that. That's what they fought for. They fought for an Eritrea that is independent and free, and now it's not. And even in those few years of the experience that I had in that country, to see it, the crackdown, to see how repressive and how closed it is as a country now, is just so disheartening. And let alone me, imagine if it was somebody who sacrificed their whole youth, their whole life for this kind of, because they had that kind of vision and idea of what their nation would be. And these are the people, and because it is a small country, you know them. You know the people who did this, who fought, and they're your family members, they're your uncles, they're your brothers, they're your sisters. Almost every person in Eritrea has at least one family member that they can say died in the war for independence. And and since it is also so intertwined with politics, it's been silenced, everybody's been scared into not talking about this issue. What better way to express it in a way that, at least, through art, through bringing up the issues, and
well, how has your artwork evolved over the self-discovery phase of your life, then going to Eritrea and seeing the repressiveness of the country, and now, upon reflection, being 14 years later? I mean, there's 3 very distinct, large phases of time there. So, I mean, how do you feel today, upon reflection of those 2 other phases, and how does that come out in the artwork?
There are so many things that we all feel like we want to change in the world, and issues that are and causes that are personal to you. And there is, you can do your own small little bit. Like I felt like they were able to silence those people. They're in jail. Those people cannot speak. But, you know, I can. I'm not in that country. I'm in a free country. I grew up, you know, taught, and I was educated in a place that wanted these things. And so they're, you know, I feel like they're connected. It's all me. These are all expressions of me, but it's many of, I think a lot of people who grew up in different cultures, it's a very, it's an experience that's universal. Many people are products of migration. We are all products of migration, whether it's from the Caribbean, from Africa, way back when. If we are all products of that, and the struggle of being of one place and another, and existing in a different place, we're all interconnected. So I know also from the reaction to my art from different people, even though the art I create is very personal to me, I know it speaks a different, also a universal language. And so that's part of the expression, you know.
So what do you see for your art, like in the future? Is it based upon, is it in sync with where the country is? Like, if, for instance, if Eritrea tomorrow, you heard in the news, I don't know whether it's done by a coup, whether it's just done by agreement that it's an open society, democracy, and so on and so forth. How would that
reflect in my art?
Yeah, would that make any sort of changes within the? I mean, I'm sure it would, but you know, as far as, you know, like if you started painting tomorrow with a brand new feeling of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's part of why I wanted to do the celebratory aspect of Africa. It's not all bad, you know. So there's lots of beauty, and there's lots of, you know, there is hope. There's always hope. There's always hope, because there's hope in the past. Nobody thought there would be an independent nation, and now it seems dark because we don't feel like there's going to be democracy. But, you know, it happened. Independence came. And democracy will happen. It may not happen in our lifetime. It may not happen, but there's always a future. There's always hope. And I don't know if that's just as human nature that we're wired to feel like there's always hope in the future. I believe my art will reflect that as well. You know, reason of, you know, in the paintings, even the colors, there's as much darkness and turmoil as there is in the pieces, there's always light areas in those pieces, because I really feel that also speaks to the light, for hope. There is a future. There are people, them sitting in that jail is a sign of that. There are people who are creating, you know, internet sites and to provide information for the Eritreans, and you know, that is not controlled by the government. That's, you know, those are people. Me doing a show is not connected to any political organization or nothing. No, it's just individuals doing different things. Those things exist, and eventually all those small little steps will make up a larger, you know, effect. Will have an effect.
That's wonderful. Does anyone have any questions? I mean, we're going to entertain some questions now, because what you talked about. I mean, to be honest with you, I did not know much about the country myself until we had that first conversation. You talked about some of these things, and it's fascinating that you've had a journey, you know, where you've actually been to a country. You were there during a time period where there was all this euphoric activity, and now to see what's happened, and it's wonderful to see the art, the diversity in the artwork, you know, where you, like you just explained, where there's beauty inside, even inside the Berlin piece. You know, you can still see the hope in the piece, you know, the vibrancy of it. So, does anyone have any questions, or for Elsa? We all learned something new today, and we would love to take any questions.
I wanted to know more about the work you did with the women as it relates to the human rights issues.
When I worked with the women's group, it was there was only one women's organization in Eritrea at the time. Basically, it was an organization to provide literacy programs for women, small microeconomic projects, and you know, they were getting funding. It was just beginning to get funding from nonprofit organizations from abroad, and I helped with writing their projects because, you know, my English was good, and and I could write the projects. And at the time I was young, you know, and of course women's issues were very personal to me. But there is, you know, it's just so many issues. There is issues of violence against women, you know, female genital mutilation issues. There's, education issues for girls, economic empowerment of women. There's so many of those issues. So that was really my initial background, and that's what I wanted to work with. You know, those were the issues. It was very personal, as also being a woman who lives in the West and growing up and being free and having the support of parents that, you know, if I had grown up there, my life would have been that. And so that's part of the reason I went back to do that kind of work.
Wonderful.
Well, are those things that you have done with women's groups, were they not considered subversive as well?
No, it was no. The movement for an independent Eritrea was a very actually progressive movement. It was very progressive, and in fact, one of their stronger points was that women were included in the liberation struggle. It wasn't the men that went out to fight. There were women fighters. There were women who, you know, were really encouraged to be just as, you know, powerful and participatory in the struggle as men.
Well, you know, I understand that this is an art talk, and I commend our hosts. They've been able to keep it afloat, keep it aloft as that. But I tell you, you know, I sat down and immediately began to feel a bit of sadness looking at you. And then I understood later why, and I really can't shake the idea of those people being in jail. So I guess I do have one question. Were they educated elsewhere? This is my question. If the movement for an independent Eritrea was, you know, founded in progress, or in the idea of progress, what happened to them? What was that one little issue that was considered?
That's the $1 million question. It's, you know, power, absolute power, corrupts absolutely. That's, I mean, at this point, that's where, I mean, the leader himself, he was one of the most progressive. He could have been a Mandela. He was brilliant, charismatic, loved by all, but he was exalted. He was exalted as the end all and be all, and after independence, he took that on very well, and doesn't believe that there should be no other version of political.
I'm sorry. I am so demoralized by so much of what we see going on, you know, over there, not just in Africa, but I think it is just so demoralizing when there is a state with a constitution that doesn't quite get you out of jail, or keep you from being put into jail without being charged and so on. It's just, and so finally, I would like to know, because I actually have a friend that visited Ethiopia and came back, you know, just touting the praises of it. It was just, but that person was a Rastafarian, and I think he did a whole lot of
alternative practice.
Absolutely. And I would love to be able to answer that person who thinks that there's nothing wrong going on in Ethiopia. So I'd like to know what can you tell us, just in concise terms, about the government of Ethiopia?
You know, I mean, all those countries, there are, like I said, growing in leaps and bounds. When I visited Kenya last year, for example, it has changed dramatically. There has been so much progress in that country. It's incredible. It's just, it really floored me. It really did. And so you have to celebrate the positive aspects. And there are positive aspects in Eritrea too. But at the same time, I cannot ignore some of those other issues that exist. And those other issues exist in the Ethiopian community as well, in the Ethiopian government. There are many people who feel that it's not addressing human rights, some of the human rights issues and things. But I think it's much more acute in Eritrea. It's much smaller, it's easier to control versus a huge country that is harder to control.
I see.
Also, you seem to have keen insight into a lot of issues. I was just wondering, most of it comes, I guess, from your personal experiences, but what is your educational background?
I finished my bachelor's in Canada. My degree actually is in literature. So I've always been very drawn to the creative arts. But I think by virtue of being from places like Eritrea, you do get educated about the politics, not only of your country, but the countries around you. And then you end up, because you migrate, your family moves, you have to learn new cultures, new everything. And by virtue of living here, you have to learn the culture here and assimilate and things. I did like I said, I came fairly early. I did my high school in the US. So I feel like I'm a product of both worlds. I'm a product of Africa, but I'm also a product of the West. So, but you do get, politics is a part of your life in places like that, in Africa. So you do get educated about those kinds of things.
A couple of quick questions. One is obvious because of what we do, but I'm wondering about what the tourism initiatives are for the country, because we see, there's a strong push. Ethiopia, Kenya, a lot of African countries really going after this, but really trying to diversify their industry and develop more of a tourism industry.
Yeah, I think out of those, Kenya and Ethiopia are trying really hard, and they've succeeded. I mean, they're doing really good.
Despite the human rights.
Yeah, they're still struggling. I mean, there's an effort, though. I think maybe we are impatient. We have lived in places like this, in societies like this, but for example, I question myself in that, Eritrea is a very young nation, so maybe there has to be struggle for democracy, has to be struggle for all these economic developments. And like the tourism in Kenya is really developed, well developed. The service industry there, well developed. Ethiopia is growing. Eritrea has such great potential, but it's very difficult to operate there. So there's still a huge potential, that especially the ocean, the sea. There are thousands of islands. It's pristine waters because 30 years of war, there has been no ships, no nothing go there. And you can just swim on the surface and you will just see a plethora of like fish and flora and fauna. You don't even need goggles, You don't need to go deep down diving. The water is clear. There's been no pollution. And that kind of water is rare, and it would have been an incredible industry. But there were many people who tried to, but it's, rules and, blocked here, and no, you can't build there, and eventually that kind of industry has been shut down. The tourism in Eritrea exists from Eritreans going back to visit their families. That's where the money is, and that's where the influx of dollars comes, because people still have family and they want to go visit. That's where it is, and official government things. But now, even I just read recently that the U.S. ambassador has been out since July, and there is no U.S. presence right now in Eritrea.
Any other questions? Wait there.
Yeah, you cover a lot of the language in your paintings. Could you talk a little bit more about the Eritrean language, or sort of the alphabet?
The alphabet. the alphabet is derived from Ge'ez. Ge'ez is the original language. It's like what Latin is for English and French and Spanish. So now it's only used in the churches, in liturgy, you know, and so in the older, the clergy use Ge'ez. Nobody uses it in speech. And Amharic is spoken in Ethiopia, and Tigrinya is spoken in Eritrea and Ethiopia, parts of Ethiopia. Those are the two main languages. I believe even in Kara they speak, you know, there's some other languages that use this alphabet, but the two main ones are Amharic and Tigrinya that use this alphabet. It's called Fidel. The alphabet itself is called Fidel. And there are something like 237 characters in the alphabet. There are 37 root sounds. It's a sound-based language. So each letter represents a sound. There are 37 root sounds and 7 variations of each sound. So when children are learning the language, they're taught in it's very musical way of learning the language. So that's the.
So what are some of the
Examples?
symbols?
Examples. Like for example, I mean when you're learning, for example, when you're a child, you learn ha hu hi ha he hu ho la lu li la le le lo sa su si sa se su so ka ku ki ka ke ku ko. So things like that. And there are certain sounds that don't exist in English, like so this is a l sound. So I mean I've mixed the different sounds basically, but the way it's well organized. Like all the O sounds have a little circle. All the E sounds have a little leg, you know, a little tag. A little U sounds have a little tag in the middle of the letter. Those that way. That's how it's organized in a very specific way. So you know that if you see that tag in the middle of the letter, it's an U sound, not a sound or things like that. So it's and you're like say your name is Alex. So you know in English it's consonants and vowels, right? But in it's by the syllable. So Alex. Maybe Alex.
Alex.
Huh? Alex. Forest, exactly. So everybody's name would be by the sound of your name, not so much whether it's a consonant and a vowel that make up a sound.
So you can't, I mean, for I guess the West, you could write a whole manifesto in your paintings, and we wouldn't know that was there. Now, of course, if that made
But these are
happen.
abstract, so for me, I just love the shapes. There's like dancing, you know, shapes in there. I just, you know, I think the language is fascinating myself. So when you grow up in it, you don't notice it so much. It's like, well, you know, people who live in DC don't necessarily go and stare at the White House or the monument or those kind of things. It's there all the time. But when you come as an outsider and see it, it is fascinating. So I really wanted to celebrate that aspect of, and this only exists in Eritrea and Ethiopia, this language. Nowhere else. This originated there. It is, just a language that's just rich in everything, in parables, in humor, everything. So it's fascinating.
So then a related question: what's the difference between
Amharic
and Ethiopian?
It's like the difference is like Spanish and English or English and French. It's separate languages. A person who speaks only one or the other doesn't necessarily understand. They will understand certain words. There are some similar words, but a person who speaks only Tigrinya and is listening to a conversation in Amharic does not understand the conversation.
Speaking of the sounds that you just made, is that why you titled your exhibition that way? Afruika?
The reason is because of, I wanted it to be about Africa, but I just want to say Africa because it's been said so many times. And that version of it is Egyptian. And Ka is the soul It is an Egyptian. It was actually, I think, one of the the Ka is a soul in hieroglyphics, right? And so it's the soul of the continent.
That's beautiful. Are you fluent in one or both of the languages?
I can speak both.
Okay.
I speak better Tigrinya than I speak Amharic. I can understand Amharic and speak it as well. I'm not fluent because I grew up outside. I have an American accent or an English accent to my Amharic and Tigrinya.
Okay, a follow-up question. Given the complexity of a language and its integration in your work, do you know if people who speak English as opposed to one of the two languages experience your work differently? So they came upon celebration, for example, would all equally come away with that, or would there be varying degrees of being held?
I mean, I think, of course, it helps to have context in some of the pieces that I do. But it's like if you were to listen to Brazilian music, or to see, when we see some of the Chinese or Japanese or Asian characters that stand for the symbols of peace and love, you still connect. You may not understand it fully, but you still connect to the lines, the shape of it all. So I know that sometimes, even though people may not know exactly what those shapes and things are in there, you still can connect at a certain level. Just like I would connect to a completely different culture than my own. Whether it's in music, we listen to music that you don't understand the words to, but you love it, right? So, because you can connect either to the beat of it or to the rhythm. And so it's the same for me, like, especially abstract art. It's like jazz. You connect to the rhythm of the colors and the shapes. And so although people may not know the context behind it, some of the people who have, like you mentioned, some of the collectors that I have, I mean, those people know it because they've been to those countries. They connect very much to the pieces in that sense. And so some of the collectors that I have understand the context behind it, but there are many who are not from Eritrea or Ethiopia and still connect because there's that aspect. You can connect to something that is not of your own culture. You connect to it at a different level. Any other questions, please?
Anyone else? Anyone else?
Actually, can I?
Sure.
Last question, I promise.
No.
One of the pieces that was not featured in the discussion is actually my favorite from this particular presentation. It's called Wisdom. Can you speak to what?
That piece has a lot of the symbols from hieroglyphics from Egypt to me, and I think again they were so wise. They were so, to have the Book of the Dead, to have the whole system in Egypt that they did. It's incredible to me that the continent is just so full of resources like that, of wisdom, and so that piece speaks to me, to that.
Well, Elsa, thank you very much. I think it's been a wonderful, wonderful education today. So now, please take the time to walk around and look at all of the artwork. It goes all the way to the back, and there's plenty of pieces here that you weren't included in the presentation. So enjoy.
Yeah, I wanted to also just say there are some really wonderful organizations too in Eritrean websites that are providing information. They are, that's the only free press we have right now. So they are the ones where we get information and raise awareness about these issues. And there were really one of the prominent ones really featured the talk and to spread the word as well. So I have information about that. I can always provide it to Alice and Myrtis if anyone is interested as well.
Are you still taping that? Can you just
share the websites?
Yeah, those websites are actually all in 3 languages. They're both in English, Tigrinya, and Arabic, because Arabic is also spoken in Eritrea. There are many, but I would say 3 of the biggest ones. One of them is called asmarino.com. Another one is called asenna.com, and another one is called awate.com. They all have foundations. They all do it out of their own pocket. They have their, they struggle half the time. There's government cyber hackers trying to shut the websites down, and it's just people giving, a lot of Eritreans who just give what they can to help maintain those sites. And a lot of the work, the articles, is done by volunteers, and they're also on the forefront. And it's just thank God for the internet, because that's the only way that people can get independent news in many, many countries.
I've noticed there's an Eritrean cultural center, I might not be calling it by the right name, right downtown Washington, D.C., near the Convention Center on New York Avenue. Is that a...
Almost everything that is Eritrean in D.C. is very much connected to the government. So it's the political party of the government that it runs that restaurant. A lot of people go there because that's one of the only places, but it's very much, there are no, the restaurants and stuff like that are not. But for example, there's an annual festival that's done, but I would never be able to exhibit my art in a festival that is like that. It's considered the national festival, but they would never allow it.
Wow.
I did have one last question, and it was if you could talk just a little bit about the fact that your work was featured in
The
Amnesty International.
Yeah, there was the first ever human rights arch festival in March of this year. Amnesty International is also on the forefront. They are involved in the issues about the people who are imprisoned. They are on the forefront of that. There are many organizations, small, but there's a lot of effort trying to get some resolution to this issue in Eritrea. And so Amnesty International is one of the organizations that really support that. And the other organization is Committee to Protect Journalists, based out of New York. They're also very involved, and have given one of the journalists who is in prison an award for human rights award for journalism for one of the people who was in jail in Eritrea. So our Amnesty International has been really affected by the economic downturn, and so a lot of their funding has gone down. And there was a group of people that really wanted to help, raise awareness about all these issues, and it was a 4-day festival, arts festival. So all sorts of music, sculpture, painting, you name it, everything, performance art, that related to human rights in Washington earlier this year, and these paintings were part of one of the exhibits there.
Well, thank you, Elsa, very much. We appreciate it. And